Cue lightning and thunder sounds.
You could just edit that in.
I'm going to edit that out. That's not a problem. I mean, that's the best part about this. Maybe what I should do is I'm going to say I'm going to edit it out, and I'm just going to leave it in there, and this is going to be the episode. Welcome to Poutine Politics, Canadian issues served with cheese curds. My name's Adam.
My name's Mike.
And today, we're going to talk about electoral reform.
Yay!
As many Canadians that paid attention to the last federal election know, one of the Liberals' platforms was electoral reform. So what is electoral reform? Why don't we start there? Mike, what do you think electoral reform is?
Hopefully fixing our broken political system that was made in 1870 that doesn't have any representation now. That even the political parties that still want to have it don't do their own elections that way.
Yes, actually, that's very true. That's a good point to even start with, is the fact that in the ridings, we use first past the post. But when, let's say the Liberals or the Conservatives have a convention and they're electing a new leader, they don't use first past the post. They use a proportional representation system. But apparently, to use a proportional representation system as a form of election in the country for the people, all the people to choose as opposed to members of the party. Oh, no, they can't do that. No, they're not smart enough, or not enough of them made the choice that this is the way we should go. Now, I had a certain focus that I wanted to talk about in this in this episode in regards to, what options there are with electoral reform. And I'm probably still going to get there, but the first thing might not be changing the method in which we vote. It's how we vote. Okay.
What do you mean by how we vote?
Okay. So right now, when we have elections in Canada or in the provinces, so the first thing is the day that we have a vote. Okay. So most federal, provincial, municipal elections happen on a Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday. Those are the three dates most common used in Canada. So that's a problem already, because all three of those days are, weekdays. Depending on when they happen, obviously you have issues with kids being in school, finding daycare for them, people that work 9-to-5 jobs. I understand that, the work industry has obviously changed in regards to the shifts that people work, but there's still a lot of people that work day shifts and they can't necessarily get the time off of work to go vote. Or am I going to take the time during my lunch hour to go vote? Well, now I can't have my lunch. Mike's putting his hand up saying I vote on my lunch hour. Some people, and then obviously people decide just not to vote either because of apathy or because they don't have the time. So when I was researching election days across the world, we're in the minority. Most countries that have set election days hold them on Sunday.
Which makes sense. And yeah, we're aware that you get a certain amount of time off if you want to go think about your decision and figure out who you want to, but you don't get paid for that time off. So most people don't take that time off to go vote. So that one caveat aside, yes, why we have elections during the week in which we work, for the most part, is just crazy talk.
The other thing, I guess, in regards to election day as well. Now, I thought it might have been more prevalent, but when I was doing my research, it turns out that it's only one country. But the other issue the other thought I had was, okay, well, if it's not going to be, say, on a Saturday or a Sunday, why not have it on multiple days? So let's say the election is going to be during such and such a week, and the results aren't going to come out until after the end of the week. But, the election period starts on this Monday and goes until the following Sunday. Now, the only country by the looks of it that does that is India, which, for obvious reasons, India just had an election and they have something like 900 million registered voters. And there's a lot of rural area in India where it's hard for people to get to, their polling stations. So they need the time to hold an election of that size. We are 36 million people. Not all of those people are obviously voters, because that includes kids. And again, there are people that are in rural areas, but we tend to have more polling stations. So it does make it a little easier for those rural people to get out and vote if they choose to vote. So maybe multiple days isn't the solution, but I think changing it so that elections will always be either on a Saturday or a Sunday makes the most sense.
I know that there are some countries, I believe Australia, that you have the day off to vote. I don't know if that's 100% certain or not, but there are countries that also say, listen, this is the day you vote, everyone. And it's mandated to vote too. Do you know about that?
Yes.
That some countries require you to vote, not just you can't vote.
You got to my next topic. Or the next part of the topic was compulsory voting.
Yes.
You read my mind.
Compulsory voting, which I tend to lean more towards that you should do, simply because, you're given the right to vote. I mean, at least do something with that. I mean, you don't have to vote. Like, even if you go in, you can right now, even if you want to, you can walk into any polling station as it stands right now and say, I'm declining my vote. That's an option you have. And they have to keep records of how many people apathetically walked in and went, no, I don't like the people that are running, so I'm not voting.
Well, either declining your vote or spoiling your vote, because I guess they're kind of the same thing, right?
They're not counted the same way.
No, yeah, you're right. They're not counted the same way, but it's like you voted, but it didn't count, or it didn't count towards, say, the final numbers, right?
Yeah, if you're trying to make a statement, it doesn't count. That's the thing. Like, if you're trying to purposely not vote, they register it differently. Whereas if you spoil a ballot, it could be any number of reasons. And
yeah,
they just like errors or whatever that case may be.
Okay, so yeah, the second point I was going to make in regards to maybe this is more of the electoral reform we need to look at is the compulsory voting situation. So you mentioned Australia, and Australia has had compulsory voting across the country since 1974. It looks like. No, they reduced. Okay, so they reduced the age to 18 in 1974. So they actually had compulsory voting before then. They had some issues, obviously, with their indigenous people in regards to when they gave them the vote, but they made it compulsory back in the 60s, 70s, and it's enforced. From articles that I've read in the past, you can actually be fined or serve jail time for not voting. Now, the jail time is not anything severe, obviously, but it's still that punishment to be like, look, this is something, how we always say, oh, your grandparents, your great grandparents, they fought in, World War I, World War II. They fought for your freedoms. They fought for your rights. They fought for, your ability to protest, your ability to wear whatever you want to wear and be whoever you want to be. And one of those things that they fought for is a free society where we can vote in elections for the political party of our choice. It could maybe those kinds of things could be an argument against making voting compulsory, but maybe it should be.
Yeah, it's still a tough subject. I mean, as Canadians, how we get our freedom, we wrote for it. We didn't, fight anybody. We're like, can we please be a free Britain? Can we be free, please? Pretty please. Okay, thank you. Oh, we still need a monarch? Okay, yeah, we'll give him no powers. But yeah, sure, he can sign off on everything. There is an argument to have for both compulsory and non-compulsory. I like the idea of compulsory. Personally, I'm leaning more towards that, but I can easily see you saying, I don't want to be forced to go out of my way and take time out of my busy day and to lose productivity hours to make people vote. And that's a very powerful argument that, yeah, I could easily say, okay, fine. I relent. I will relent on the idea of compulsory voting if it means other electoral reforms go through. That's not high on my priority list by any sense of the imagination.
Yeah. That's why I think I felt like I wanted to start there with electoral reform before even saying, well, we need to change the system in which the voting actually occurs. Because first we have to do something that gets people out to vote. Because my concern is that we could change from the first past the post system to some sort of ranked balloting, whatever proportional representation system it happens to be. But I think people still might not show up to vote. And that's our problem more so is, say in the last federal election, it was 56% of voters roughly that showed up to vote. So again, 56% of the population is making the decision for the rest of the population. And then you have obviously population disparities and the fact that we knew that the Liberals were going to form government before we even knew what the election results in Manitoba were.
Yeah, that's
a time zone thing, but
yeah. Let's not get started on how bad our system is. The fact that, what's that? Ontario decides to vote every single year. Yeah, let's not go there. The other thing to consider is just roll my eyes. Can you hear me rolling my eyes? The other thing to consider is that Another thing about how I vote is the idea of bringing electronic voting in, where you're not making people physically show up to an address, and maybe have people have the ability to vote either ahead of time, or I know that you can write in ballots, but that's still a pain. Or having where you can download an app to your phone and do it that way. Now, I understand electronic corruption can happen, things like that. I get that. However, if you're going to tell me that I can somehow make my vote cast from my house rather than going to the polling station, I'm more likely to do that than to go to the polling station because it's just easier.
Well, and if it's an online system, I mean, with the prevalence of internet, everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but a large majority of people have a cell phone. You know what? If it's election day and I don't have to go wait in a line, and I can open an app or a website on my phone and I can be like, boop, this is who I'm voting for. Yeah, I'm going to do that too. I try to vote in every election now. I didn't used to vote in municipal elections. I've realized over time that the municipal elections are the ones that are the most important to us because they're the ones that affect us the most.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they also have the lowest turnout. That's something that needs to change. Is, hey, we need to get people more focused on what's happening in their own cities and towns before what's going on with the federal government. I mean, when you think about, let's say, the things that have occurred even over the last 12 months from the federal government, or, I mean, provincial government in Ontario, maybe it's a little bit of a different story because there's a lot of things that they've put into place that can affect a lot of people, teachers, healthcare. Again, I kind of want to leave that for another day, but people focus too much on federal and provincial issues, which I think, from my own point of view, have less effect, right? Like, technically, an increase to my property taxes is more likely to have a direct effect on me than the fact that the carbon tax was issued.
Yeah. Like, if the carbon tax, yes, it may affect your budget, but if federally they decide we're going to make a brand new park, okay, well, that park probably is not going to be beside you. If provincially they make a brand new park, well, unless you live in Prince Edward Island, it's probably not going to affect you. If locally they decide to turn your backyard into a park because they decide to expropriate the land, guess what? You got a new park in your backyard. Too bad for you. And that's something that the city can do. City can rezone. City can do things like that people don't often realize, where the biggest impacts can come into play, where they can make the changes that aren't as flashy but do cost you, and especially with property taxes, things like that can definitely cost you in many, many more ways than you would normally would see. I mean, everyone, if somebody said, "Oh, we're going to raise the GST," or GST.
Well, it is still technically GST.
Yeah, the harmonized sales tax by 1%. Everybody's in an uproar. But how many times have you heard somebody complain about the property taxes going up by 20%? No one talks about that.
No.
So
not to the same extent. I mean, if you're already connected to your local community, maybe you'll hear it a little bit more. But the truth is that people tend not to be connected to their local community in comparison to what's my federal party doing. To kind of get into the methods of electoral reform, the ones that I guess were most prevalent in regards to the Liberals' campaign promise and what research was done. So proportional representation is, I guess, kind of the broad range, more popular version of elections that exists in a lot of countries around the world. Before I get into too much of the technicals about them, where we've already started to see a change with proportional representation is actually in Ontario. So the previous Liberal government introduced a change to the Municipal Elections Act that actually allowed municipalities in Ontario to change how their ballots work for elections. So they could change their election system, because, again, municipalities in Ontario and probably, obviously across the country, still run as first past the post as well, which seems relatively ludicrous as well, because you're more likely to have more people running in a municipal election for one particular seat, council position, mayor, than what you're going to get in a federal election or a provincial election. They made this change where cities could change how their voting system worked. So London, Ontario, actually changed for their 2018 municipal election to what's called the single transferable voting system. So this is where you get a ballot and it has all of the candidates to vote for, and you rank them in order from 1 to whatever. And what happens is that the person that wins has to get 50% plus 1. But like there's no, okay, well, he got 30% of the vote, and since that was the most out of everybody, that's the person that wins. It may turn out that person might still win by the time the ranked balloting is figured out. But if you get through the first round of counting everybody's votes, and let's say the first place guy has 30%, like I said. So what happens is that the last place person gets dropped off, and the counters take all of their ballots, and they see, okay, well, those people voted for that person that dropped off, number 1. Who did they vote number 2? And they reallocate their votes to the other people based on who their number 2 choice was. And so again, if someone gets to 50% plus 1, they're the winner. If they don't, they drop off the next candidate, and so on until they have someone who has 50% plus 1. So that's when I was looking at electoral reform, I like that system. But it just turned out that, at least in the election in London, that the people that ended up winning anyways would have been the same people that won if first past the post had still been the voting option.
There's been many videos about why first past the post is so bad. And basically, first past the post allows fringe parties that would normally never get voted in to actually get in. So if you have a group of, let's say, 9 people, and they all want to go out for dinner. Well, 2 of them are vegan, 4 of them don't really care where they go, and you have 3 that are meat eaters. They like meat, but they'll eat anything. And then you have a selection of 6 restaurants. Well, if the meat eaters all vote the same way, and then everyone else kind of, because there's 2 vegan restaurants and there's 4 other kind of restaurants, like there's a Thai place, a chili place,
Texas barbecue,
yeah. But there's one meat eating place. Then the meat eaters get to decide where they go, even though the vegans, they're not going to like that at all because they don't like meat. They're vegan, and the 4 of them that are kind of okay with whatever, they can eat at the meat place. They're okay, but the problem is it's not a good representation of what the whole would want. So the whole would want something that's more that both can satisfy the vegan person and can also satisfy the meat person at the same time. So that's the problem with first past the post, is that you can get these extreme people that are on one side of the spectrum, and they lean heavily on those type of people to get those voters out there. So that way they can take control of the situation. So you get situations where, a party has a person gets elected and they can win 22% of the vote. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And not only do they have 22% of the vote, 50% of the people would never want them in. That's the problem.
Well, which is why, especially in the last few elections, it's been, okay, well, the party that won, they got, say, 40% of the vote. Well, 60% of the people didn't vote for them. And so they have a majority with not a majority of the voters.
Mm-hmm.
And now some people would say, well, that's the problem. The problem with our electoral system then is that we have too many parties. And I would disagree with that, because I don't want a 2-party system. I get, yes, there's a Green Party and a Libertarian Party in the United States, but I wouldn't want a 2-party system here. I mean, it essentially feels like a 2-party system because under first past the post, the only parties that really tend to have a chance are the Liberals or the Conservatives. Even in 2011, when the NDP became the official opposition with over 100 seats, they were still just the official opposition. They didn't form parliament. And in the process, that was the first and only election that Stephen Harper's Conservatives won a majority. Again, the system is really designed in Canada that it might as well be a 2-party system, even though it's a 4 or 5-party system, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, and as things splinter, some people will even remember when the Conservative Party splintered. They split it into 2 different cells. You had the PC Party and the Reform Party. And if you combine those votes, they would have won the elections in the 90s. But because they split their votes, all of a sudden the Liberals get in. So that's the problem with first past the post. If you don't split those votes, the party that or the ideals of the people that voted more likely would have gone right. But unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to call it, unfortunately for the representation of the voting system, not unfortunately because of who got elected, the Liberals got in with a majority. And it's because they split their vote.
Well, yeah, I think the other issue too, even back in '93, was you technically had 3 conservative parties because you had the Bloc Québécois. The Bloc Québécois, I would say, are more conservative than liberal, but the problem is they only run in Quebec, and yet they were the official opposition. Hey, congratulations! One province is the official opposition of the entire country. Yeah. Okay. That's something that if anybody from Quebec is listening, I'm not sorry. But that's the reality of that situation as well. Like, should a party from one province really be the official opposition? Probably not, because the opinions of Quebec are not the same as the opinions of Alberta.
Yeah, I think any Albertan will agree with that. So yeah, First Past Post has quite a number of problems. I know that in our province we had an election about trying to fix that problem, which was catastrophically designed to fail from the get-go. Oh man, that was so bad.
Yeah, you know what? And that was another thing. I looked up an article from back then. So that was 2007. That was when we had that referendum in Ontario. And yeah, the problems were kind of the same as the referendum on Quebec separation. It was that the question was not worded well, and there wasn't enough education on it. There wasn't there. From the information that I found, the provincial government spent $6 million on advertising and other forms of education for this referendum to say, hey, we're looking at changing how our elections work. So I mean, $6 million doesn't go very far in the advertising world. Especially 2007, yeah, online advertising presence was still relatively new, but it's not cheap to produce a commercial, even a 30-second commercial. There's more than just, well, we had to pay the CBC or City TV X number of dollars for that 30-second spot. We had to pay all the people that had to produce that commercial. So again, $6 million doesn't go very far. And I would say it was the lack of education that made that fail. And I think the expectations or requirements for the election as well, because not only did it have to win 50% plus one of the total vote, but it also had to win a majority in a majority of ridings.
Yeah. If somebody actually did the math on it, I think they would probably find out that there was like a 1% chance of just random voting for it to actually get through. Somebody called it would have had to take a super majority in order for it to work. It wasn't just one majority. It wasn't like, it had to have all these different majority rules that made it so hard. And the reality is that during that referendum that they weren't proposing it to be changed. It's not like Brexit where they're like, do you want to stay or go? Yes or no. They said, no, this is the solution. So it made it much more difficult obstacle. If it was just simply, do you think the government should mandate electoral reform? I think they would have won handily. But that's not what the government did. The government at the time said, this is exactly what it is. We're not going to tell you. We're not going to explain why it's superior. We're just going to let you figure this out. And now keep in mind that I believe that I can't remember the exact details of the particular type of election it was they were proposing, but
that one was mixed member proportional.
Yeah, mixed member proportional. I didn't remember what it was called. But any country that has adopted that particular set of rules for electoral reform has not gone back to first past the post. Nobody's gone back to first past the post.
Germany is the prime example of mixed member proportional elections. It's why obviously you have to be kind of a news nut like me or a politics nut like me to really pay attention to this kind of stuff. But if you were to look back at, I think, German elections for the last probably 15 years at least, it's always a coalition. Which, remember when coalitions were a bad thing? Oh, we can't let the Liberals and the NDP form a coalition because it's going to be propped up by the Bloc Québécois. Again, there's Quebec stepping in and being like, we're going to be the supporting vote of the entire country. So, I mean, that's beside the point in this situation. But in Germany, this whole time that Angela Merkel has been the leader of Germany has been as a result of coalition governments. And doesn't look like anything is really going that badly over there in regards to their political situation. She's been leading that country as long as she has, and something's obviously going right.
Yeah. And the biggest flaw in first past the post, you have strategic voting. You have a thing called strategic voting. That should not be a thing when you're voting. You shouldn't have to vote strategically. You should vote based on what you want, not what you don't want. And the strategic voting is all about what you don't want. Well, if you can change your voting system so where, like I said at the beginning, where even our own premiers and elect or leaders don't vote this way, don't vote first past the post because they realize how silly it is. Even if we adopted a system like this, then it would be fine. Like, this will work. This will work well. It is a little bit complicated, but it's no more complicated than our actual political system. Like, does anyone know how a law gets passed through the House of Commons to the Senate and then back and then forward, and then the Governor General has to sign off on it? I don't think a lot of people know that that's the progress of a law. Is that any harder than mixed member proportional of some kind? That'll work just fine.
I think the general public, and maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I think the general public is smart enough that if they're given a different ballot and either have the instructions on it or they're told when they grab it from the official, then tells them this is how you have to fill the ballot in, you're going to do it right.
Just rank them. It's okay. And guess what? On a ranking system, you can just choose one. You don't have to choose all five. Let's say if you have 5 people, you don't have to be like, well, I like the Liberals over the NDP, over the PC, over the Green, over Libertarian.
Don't forget the Rhino Party.
And the Rhino Party. So if you want to, you can just go Rhino or nothing. You can just put one on the Rhino, and then the rest of them, I don't care. Throw my ballot if it's not Rhino. You can do that. That's perfectly allowed in that system. So I think that if we really wanted to see electoral reform, it has to be done in stages. You're not going to pass through everything at once. If at least they did a mixed member proportional, at least like just ranking people where like they have a runoff. Like, we have computers, just use the computer. My phone's computer can do this. Like, you don't need.
As long as the computer knows that when you press a certain place on the screen, that's where you pressed. That was what I was thinking of earlier. I'm like, what were those machines back in, was it the 2000? It was the 2000 election in the States, and it was the Diebold machines.
Don't even get me started on hanging chads.
Well, no, this wasn't the hanging chads. This was the Diebold machines. It was, but mind you, we're talking like the year 2000 touchscreen technology. It's obviously come a lot better since then. I mean, you could put iPads, obviously secure them so that people don't try and steal them, but you could set up an iPad, and that could be your voting station instead of, I have to go behind this little stupid cardboard curtain thing, and I have to mark down who I want to vote for, and then I have to put the piece of paper in this little folder thing, this other cardboard folder thing, and then I have to carry it over to this little machine that kind of looks like a shredder. So I'm worried whether or not my vote's actually going to get counted when I put this in the machine. And they take the little placard and they don't look at it, and they put it in the machine, and it sucks in the ballot, and there's my vote. Congratulations, you've been counted. Have I really?
Voter fraud's not a thing. Just gonna let you guys know right now, voter fraud is not a thing. It doesn't exist. Anyone who says there's voter fraud out there, they're just trying to get you. They're just trying to play on your conspiracy and this real thing where people think that the government's corrupt and everything like that. Yeah, that's fine. The government's corrupt, but the voting process isn't. There's too many people involved. The number of people involved, as you increase the number of people, the less likelihood it is to be corrupt. Because if one person whistleblowers, the entire thing collapses.
Well, again, unless you're the United States, in which case when one person whistleblowers, they end up having to emigrate to Russia. or
he was involved in voting. He wasn't a volunteer.
Yes, it wasn't voting, but he did have to live in an airport for a little while until Russia was like, oh yeah, come here, no problem. I mean, we're totally going to protect you. Anyways, so electoral reform, yay or nay?
Oh yeah, there's no question.
Absolutely. I don't want to speak too soon because political platforms aren't out yet. But we've obviously been disappointed by the fact that the Liberals did not go ahead with any sort of electoral reform. But I feel like this time around, it is even higher on my priority list for who I would vote for.
Oh, for sure it is. It's number one on the list. No, I just wish I could vote for a party as opposed to a person who's going to represent the party, because that makes perfect sense.
That's mixed member proportional. Anyways, since there's been some technical stuff in regards to this episode, I'm going to post links on Facebook, on our Facebook page, that talks about the different electoral systems that we mentioned, because obviously we couldn't get into all the details. And if you're interested in learning about them, they're going to be there. So thanks for listening. My name's Adam.
My name's Mike.
And this has been Poutine Politics. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Poutine Politics. Be sure to keep up with us online and through social media. Our website is poutinepolitics.ca. You can find us on Facebook at Poutine Politics. You can find us on Instagram at Poutine Politics. You can find us on Twitter at Politics Poutine, because Twitter thought we were French. We're on YouTube, and we've also started a Patreon page at Patreon, patreon.com/Poutine Politics. We hope we've entertained you enough that you can show us some love. We'll be back next week with another